We're all Rhodesians and we'll fight through thick and thin. We'll keep our land a free land, stop the enemy coming in.
Hello, thank you for tuning in this week to RightCast Radio. I am your host. They call me the Jackrabbit. With me, as always, is the founder and producer of rightchan.org,
Chadis.
And with us, as always, are our two commentators. First, our Southern Libertarian delight,
Coffee pot.
and our...
I don't know what to call me, but I'm Cobra.
And this is RightCast Radio, because the left one's broken. Alrighty, so, colleges.
Fuck them. They suck.
Burn them down.
Unless they're community college.
Shit, even that.
Well, they're conspiracy people like that. Not in the trade school, though. Trade school's good.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of rednecks there.
So, we left off last week. We were discussing what our different political beliefs and what we liked, what we wanted to get into.
Real quick. Sorry to
Yeah.
kind of make a shout out to fellows over at Jewish Antifa.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they finally got back to us.
Yeah, as it turns out, I have a feeling they didn't get our first message. I think there might have been a server error or something. So in the spirit of generosity, we're going to apologize if you're listening to this for...
They are not.
They aren't. I haven't sent them the link. I don't trust them that much.
Actually, just go ahead and read the message.
You know what? I think I will.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I messaged them, acknowledging that maybe they hadn't gotten the first message, trying to, being generous. Talking, my associates had the crazy idea that a mutual exchange of ideas would be better for both sides, as well as innocent bystanders, than brawling in the streets. Rest assured, none of us are National Socialists, and I personally admire quite a bit about the Jewish people. I understand 100% if you'd rather not, but we'd enjoy speaking to someone on the other side in the context of a civil discussion between equals. I'm trying to be, kind of magnanimous. There we go.
Yeah.
There. Nothing too off the wall.
Yep.
I received the reply, I don't particularly believe that we're equals, or that dialogue with reactionaries is useful, so it's probably going to be a no. That said, send me a link to your podcast. It sounds hilarious. Emphasis mine. I reply, of course. I figured as much. It was worth a shot. Best of luck in your endeavors. So, after that, they solicited us for a link to the YouTube channel, and...
My comments from last week stand.
Yeah.
Killed them all. All Antifa.
We're not big fans of commies here, in case no one's noticed.
No.
Yeah. Honestly, though, maybe we ought to go ahead and just send them the link, because, there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Here's the thing, though. Something I've noticed about the Antifa crowd is that they're largely without any kind of moral scruples.
Right.
And me and Jackrabbit were actually talking about this. It's entirely possible they could be fishing for info on in an effort to dox us or something.
Yeah. Here's the thing, I'm pretty much expecting this to happen at some point anyway, just because of the political beliefs we hold and the conversations we're having. Mm-hmm. That's going to happen at any point anyway. However, why feed the trolls? If we can avoid it for a little while, why not do it? Keep it as easy for us as possible. It'll happen eventually, but until it does, just keep on and don't needlessly invite trouble to your front door.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not terribly worried because, I keep a loaded Kalashnikov here.
Yeah, also we have a castle law in the state. So
this is the South. If you want to try to dox us, come on.
Yeah.
I would love to let you in my door.
You say that until the police come in.
Well,
For what?
If they don't
have a
warrant.
paramedic buddy.
Oh, okay.
That's
so
true.
there you go.
Not only that, nothing we're saying is inherently subversive.
Yeah.
We're literally
it's quite subversive, but none of it's illegal.
Yeah.
Well, subversive to the left, not subversive to the...
Yeah, we don't really...
Well, okay, take for instance what we were talking about last week. The idea that any of our, with the exception of Coffee Pot, the idea that any of our belief systems are ever becoming a reality are pretty slim.
And it's happened 4 times for mine, at least.
Right, but what I'm saying is currently 4 dudes on a podcast isn't going to do shit.
Yeah, we're not staging a coup or a revolution.
No, exactly. and I really have no interest in doing that because...
That, and I think we all established that we're all willing to settle for a continuation of the Republic with dialing back federal control.
Diet America. But
America Light.
Diet,
Half the calories flavor.
Diet America, that same crisp freedom taste, now with less restrictions. Get your tactical nukes today.
I love recreational nukes.
Yeah, and I mean, this stuff is going to happen. A lot of it, the nation, where it goes, whether it be left or right, it's going to be organic. And that's what is so important about the culture war and the podcast and stuff. It's not that we're going to physically go out there with pitchforks and torches. It's more of an ideology that we're spreading.
Yeah.
And the idea that more and more people... So if anything does happen, it's going to be organic. Well, and like every other movement, I don't see an extreme taking control because the atmosphere isn't right for it. The atmosphere isn't right for an extreme right or an extreme left to take over.
It will happen eventually, but likely not within our lifetimes.
Well, we have the opportunity to stop it, which is when I called this a necessary overreaction the other week, this is what I meant. If people listen now, and you still have a lot of the centrists that are come out of the woodworks and say no, 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 they can stop it from ever needing the far right or the far left to be able to take over. That's what this, to me anyway, that's what this is about.
Well, not only that, but there's always, it seems like there's always has been and there will be an ebb and flow in political beliefs.
Well, of course.
I think it was, I heard somewhere that the generation coming after what is my generation, Generation Y, I think the generation coming after
we're
us,
the millennials. The next
right, we're the millennials, Generation Y,
Z.
but Generation Z coming up is actually the most conservative that has come around in a long time, and the reason for that...
It's like since the 1930s?
Yeah, and the reason for that is they're looking... I honestly believe they're looking at Antifa, they're looking at the left, and they're seeing it, and they're like, wow, these guys are stupid, you know?
And it's really funny because we're the ones that get painted as violent.
Right.
Right. Show of hands here. Who here actually wants to go out and fight?
Not me.
No.
I don't.
Shut up, you don't count.
Well, the
Cobra over here raising his hand like a jackass.
The only reason I'm kind of anxious to get to the direct action phase is because I am piss poor at propaganda.
Is it that, or is it that you were a pogue? And I'm not arguing here, but...
I was a pogue. You have something against pogues?
Your entire branch is nothing but pogues, and it's amazing. It's the dumbest shit ever.
Yeah, say that next time you need close air support.
That's fine. You and the rest of your air persons can do that.
All right, so
this
is fun at all, but we're getting off topic.
We are, yes.
Yeah.
The reason I wanted to... Are we getting on with the rest of the podcast?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Podcast time.
Catch up.
Podcast time.
So,
Cobra rebooting in 3.
So anyway, the basic boil down with that is what's going to end up happening with these Antifa groups, and specifically this group that we're calling out because, well, quite frankly, they didn't even have the common decency to give a
polite response.
A polite response. You know,
they met a magnanimous kind of cordial invitation
with disdain,
with raw contempt.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't blame them because I think a large part of this actually ties into our topic for tonight. It's a lot of the colleges you see nowadays are pushing this kind of far left propaganda, and we as humans have a natural tendency to accept what our teachers say as truth,
right?
Because otherwise, why would we be learning from them?
Right, and you're also it's almost an inherited form of smugness.
Yeah. So I don't really blame them for having the attitude they do because that's the attitude they were taught and they don't know anything else.
Well, whether I don't, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day
but
because
it also
what's going to end up
basic rules of human
decency
behavior.
Yeah. What's going to end up happening here? It's all fun and games until it goes to the streets, and what's going to end up happening is not them specifically, but groups like them and part of the whole. This is a common problem. Like I didn't expect.
Look at Berkeley.
I didn't expect anything other than what we got. However, it points to the problem. Okay, we can't talk. I'm not going to bend on anything because you won't give me any options or discussions about things that we could bend on. So I guess we're taking it to the streets.
And I think that's largely has to do with the fact that with the and you see this on Twitter feeds, and it's on both the far left and your far right, and there's a bit of dehumanization of the enemy,
of course,
in a way, because you're not. For the longest time, it's been on cyberspace. It's not been, or it's been on social media. It's not been on the street. You haven't been having a dialogue with Cobra across the table. I've been they've been having a dialogue with someone on another screen somewhere, so it's easier to disconnect the human element and just paint your enemy like a monster.
And actually, I addressed a point very similar to this in the first episode.
Yeah.
You can't connect with a living, breathing, bleeding human being through another screen.
Right.
Yeah.
I have no interest in fighting these people. I don't want to fight them. If we can work out a solution that works reasonably well for all parties, I would be amenable to that.
Right.
But it's getting to the point where we're not going to have an option but to fight at some point.
Which is what I'm getting at, because at the end of the day, because there's no dialogue being opened up and they're not interested in it, that's fine.
Well, it's actually interesting. Noam Chomsky, who here's actually heard of Noam Chomsky?
I know.
Yep.
Yeah, Noam Chomsky, famous linguist for people who don't know at home, also a very big proponent of anarcho-communism. He was asked shortly after the inauguration of Donald Trump, by presumably a leftist, I'm not going to make any assumptions, but presumably a leftist on the internet about whether or not it was ethically acceptable to physically assault people who are deemed, as this person called, a Nazi, like Richard Spencer.
Right.
Richard Spencer, for those of you who listen to him, is clearly not a National Socialist.
Well, ideally, anybody who's listening to this podcast would most likely know that.
Yeah. But Noam Chomsky actually replied that it was absolutely not ethically acceptable, and was in fact counterproductive to the anarcho-communist movement, because when you bring violence into the political discourse, the most brutal guy wins. And in the words of Professor Chomsky, who I actually respect quite a bit as a linguist, the most brutal guy wins, and that's not us. They're speaking of people on his
Which
his
is
camp.
interesting. I was about to say that when I was talking about this, I said, okay, I guess we're taking it to the street, and in that scenario, might makes right. And I've been lifting, so I hope you're ready.
Something tells me I have more range time under my belt.
Yeah, there you go. And that's the thing.
Well, they used to teach marksmanship in colleges.
But
Now they teach marksmanship.
Get out.
But I mean, it's a fundamental difference in mindset. The right inherently values law, order, and strength. Because we believe that strength is key to a functioning society.
Yeah, well, you need a governmental system in place.
I've seen things on Twitter, for instance, of people within Antifa groups. Because Antifa is kind of decentralized. For those of you who aren't really up on how anarchist cells function, I was an anarcho-capitalist for several years. But you see these people, and they're talking, and they're like, should we lift? Should we make ourselves stronger so that we can compete with the other side? And you have people saying no, because physical strength is positively correlated with right-wing political views, and we can't become like our enemy.
What?
Yep.
It's actually true.
But
Physical
you're
health
communist,
is positively correlated with...
Wait, hold on. But you're anarchist. How does that...
Also, correlation does not equal causation, but it is
true.
interesting.
It's if, for instance, if someone is wealthy, generally considered physically attractive, and in good physical shape, odds are statistically they are right wing in their political and social views.
Yeah, two of those things.
This is the internet; no one can see you.
Yeah.
On the internet, no one knows you're a dog.
That's funny.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, and I'm afraid that this... I mean, other than... I'm not talking about the Antifa, riots that have been going on right now.
Yeah.
I'm talking more of a full-scale thing, because here's the issue I have, and I've seen this happening, because I've popped over onto the anarcho-communist Reddit, subreddit, and that kind of such. And I've been reading, and what I'm reading is a little bit scary.
Yeah.
Not because I'm worried, but because it's very telling of what's going to come within the next couple of years. Yeah. They're starting to organize. Their doublethink is strong, and at some point they're going to pull a Soviet Union, and that's we're going to get a version of the USSR here, because what's happening right now, there's discussions going on it started with the Berkeley riot, because they got trounced.
They got their asses kicked.
In Berkeley. Which is the Antifa equivalent of losing their capital city.
Yeah, that is the capital of oddly enough, stateless empire they're wanting to build.
So what ended up happening is they started talking and they started saying, oh, well, do we need a leader? And they basically were describing a chain of command while literally jumping over themselves to avoid calling it a chain of command.
Yeah.
The doublethink is strong with them. And at some point...
Hierarchy is absolutely anathema to the anarchist model.
Of course. But the doublethink is strong here. And what's going to end up happening is at some point they're going to figure out a way to do it where they're like, oh, he's not in charge. We just listen to everything he says and we do what he says.
Yeah. He's elected by consensus, and when he's served his purpose, he will step down. Because that's literally like... I used to read a lot of information from CrimeThink, which is a decentralized anarchist collective online, mostly like anarcho-syndicalists, anarcho-primitivists, anarcho-communists. Which is funny because I was an anarcho-capitalist.
Yeah.
You know, fuck roads, and I love recreational nukes, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And these people are... I don't think they understand that you cannot have a functioning society without some kind of hierarchy. No. Or that hierarchy is natural. Where you have two or more people, there will be a hierarchy that develops organically. It's part of the natural order. It's unavoidable.
See rightchan.org for more.
Yeah, I have quite a lot about this.
But the idea there is that the idea that I'm getting to is it's going to happen. I don't know how long it will take for the doublethink to take effect, but it will happen. And when that happens, when they start organizing and when these riots become more than riots, that's when the real bloodshed's going to happen. Because you're already seeing, and it's easy to laugh at them on the internet. And they're very silly when they're going out with their range days, but there's a problem here. They have guns and they're training to use them.
Fun note on that. It was actually discovered that those guns were mostly airsoft.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But a guy on pole actually found their range and was taking photos from their range. He had infiltrated.
Even so, though, they won't be at some point.
Yeah,
there's going to be, because they're going to idealize this and get it to the certain point. They're going to paint us as such monstrosities that the only answer is to kill us.
Well,
and when that happens, that is when it's going to become a real problem.
At some point, they're going to shift gears from anarcho-communists to straight-up Bolsheviks.
They'll eventually go through the Bolshevik, Leninist, and then finally Stalinist phases, because that's just how communism works.
Well, and frankly, most of them are Maoists anyway. And Maoism is extremely militaristic.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
what I'm saying is...
Mao killed, 65 million of his own people?
When it gets to this point, and, this is when we're going to have to really consider our next step as right-wing, because at that point, then it will not be safe to go outside, and at that point, that's when real, no bullshit, honest-to-God battle lines are going to be drawn. And that's where we as a people, and I mean the big W, we the people, if you will, are going to have to make some serious decisions.
Run this by you. If this does ever escalate, I really hope that it doesn't, but it's looking like it may very well.
The writing's on the wall.
Right. If and when this does happen, what would be the reaction from, say, the United States government, where suddenly you have two armed factions and
within their own borders?
What is there, are they going to say, okay, let's kill both of these factions?
There's going to be so there's a couple of different directions that could go to my thought. The first reaction is going to be the one that you see happening in places like Sweden and France right now, where instead of Syrian immigrants, it's going to be those poor misunderstood Antifa groups.
Yeah,
and they're going to really crack down. You're going to see a huge crackdown on gun sales. You're going to see a crackdown on free thought and free speech. You're going to see a crackdown on. It's going to get to the point where, because I don't think the police are going to do it. It's going to be the media. So you're going to have your BuzzFeeds, your Huffington Posts, your Washington Journals. These things, they're going to be doing what they're doing in not Syria, Sweden right now. Whenever
same thing. But.
Yeah, right. Well, when somebody makes a derogatory comment against a certain group, the press will actually track them down and will come to their door and say, "Hey, you said this, blah blah blah."
Well, we have castle doctrine, so good luck with that.
Well, see, that's the problem, though. What happens when there is a bloody armed conflict going on? And let's hope it never happens, but it's looking like it very well could. It's not a crazy impossibility, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. The thing is that we've seen with Obama's attempted weapons ban, the Clinton assault weapons ban, our government responds to propaganda.
Oh yeah. Well, not only that,
and
but,
right now, the left has an amazing propaganda game.
Yeah.
Like we might have them in terms of direct action, but their propaganda game is strong.
Well, not only that, but an armed populace is probably the greatest threat to the system that or to the establishment that you can have. And
so the federal government,
if you get a lot of left wingers in there and they're trying to change the government into a Marxist entity, immediately the first thing they're going to do is say, okay, guns are bad because we can't have these people rising up and saying, no, you're not taking our freedoms.
And that's what I'm getting at. That's the other possibility. The other possibility is going to be an extreme martial law, where you're going to see the government crack down and say, fuck it. Everybody's getting out of here. Everybody get the fuck out the bar.
Yeah.
Like they're going to shut down the streets. They're going to have them like, no. And that's going to be interesting as well, because that's where there's some troubling times that could possibly be ahead.
I think is probably the most likely.
I find that to be the most likely as well.
But that turns into a Mexican standoff.
yeah.
Yeah.
You have far right militias fighting far left and the government,
who is fighting both equally.
and the left is doing the same thing. It'll be three factions mutually fighting each other.
Yeah.
That having been said, though, if the government does decide to take a side, it is in their best interest to side with the leftists who want to. Ironically enough, it will be in the government's best interest to side with the anarcho-communists because, one, they're a weak opponent, and two, whether they say so or not, they want to concentrate power under a premier, and the government could very easily fill that role. It's going to be a lot easier for the government to side with the left, because the left can be mollified.
So
the right cannot be.
Let's back this train up just a little bit, because
That being said, this is also a worst case scenario.
right, this is Armageddon thoughts here.
Yeah.
But let's back this train up a little bit and run this by you, because once again, I said talking about like Generation Z, and then there's a bit of an awakening within the millennial unit, and you saw this in was it back with the baby boomers? A lot of them were leftist as could be, the whole hippie movement during the 60s, that kind of thing. As they got older, and once they saw Reagan in office, they begin to see conservatism in action. And that actually changed a lot of minds during that time. Now, not everybody. You've still got, your boomers who are still, very leftist. But is that not an option where that...
Well, here's the problem with that. By the time that shift occurred, that's when you first start seeing the rise of the neoconservatives.
Right.
Neoconservatives were trash.
Trickle down economics.
Yeah.
So by that point, the mainstream right had been diluted to kind of a vague, ambiguous, patriotic anti-communism.
Right.
Which worked at the time because both sides were centrist.
Yeah.
Right. And not only that, but it does seem to me like you have a very... Because, I tend to be, like I said, libertarian in my mindset, but I also tend to be very constitutionalist in my outlook. And that's, when you look back, and is it a case where you could take people aside, maybe one at a time, and if 100 people do this, and let's say you get, essentially proselytize, and look at history, this is how the United States government worked, this is how long it worked, this is what, we ended slavery, we, freedom breeds more freedom, blah, blah.
So, I like what you're putting down. Here's the problem with it.
Yeah.
When you're talking to particularly people that are either left-leaning or would prefer to be left-leaning or in the right area where they're too young to really decide, but it's pretty obvious which way they're going to go.
Yeah.
The problem with these types, and the big failing of the right is the right likes to talk in facts and figures.
Right.
Now, I find this to be the correct way to think and the correct way to discuss. However, it is not an effective way to speak to the left because the left, every argument they make is an appeal to emotion.
Right.
What you need to do, you need to cloak facts and figures into emotion,
into an appeal of emotion, because like one of the ones that I like to hear the most is, let's take the Syrian immigrants, because that's a fairly hot button issue.
Right.
What the common leftist reaction is, what about the children?
Yeah.
What about those poor Syrian children that just want to go to school?
Yeah.
What about our children?
Yeah.
Exactly. And
What about our children who are being raped and killed?
That's exactly the correct response to that, because you have to match emotional plea with emotional plea.
Right.
It doesn't matter, because most people don't care. They either do not care or they don't have the mental capacity. And I'm not being hateful; it's just a fact.
Yeah.
They either don't care or don't have the mental capacity to look at a spreadsheet and look at a statistic block
Well,
and translate that.
60% of these migrants are males between 18 and 34.
Right? They don't. That doesn't compute to them.
Yeah.
So the only way to do it is to cloak it in an appeal to emotion or appeal to authority.
Or say, instead of saying, hey, 60% of them are male adults within fighting age, say, hey, when these people rather go back to their homes, shouldn't we stop messing around with Syria, let them be Syria,
Yeah.
and let these people go back home?
Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of saying, oh, well, we need, when we hear, oh, well, what about their women? What about our women?
Yeah.
I mean, you counter because every point they bring up is also true of what is happening to our people.
Right.
And this also implies that the individual in question is asking questions and listening and willing to engage in discussion.
Well,
like these folks here, these Antifa.
Yeah.
They're true believers.
Oh, yeah.
They're a lost cause. You'll never win them over.
Well, not only that, and that's why I say go over and you talk to them one at a time. You don't, you never engage a group because there's gonna be that herd mentality because unfortunately humans. We tend to work.
Well,
in
we're
groups.
pack animals.
Yeah, we're pack animals.
The only way you can win a group over is by winning the leader of that group over, and that's
Right.
extremely difficult to do.
Right. Now that's
The best
why
way
I
is
say
to kick their ass and piss on them.
that's why I say
I mean, it works for wolves.
Right.
yeah. But, okay. What I'm saying, like if you're in a coffee shop, just strike up a conversation with somebody. Like hey, da 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 da. Here's what I believe. Here's the right wing ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Here's why I believe what I believe. Not don't go to a riot and expect to win converts. You might have some luck. I think there's a Russian guy on YouTube from who was actually alive during the 80s when the Soviet Union was still a thing, and he actually talks to people. The majority of the people that he deals with.
Here's the thing about the Soviet Union. It wasn't that long ago. The Soviet Union was still a thing when I was alive.
Yeah, I know.
When I was born.
I was very young. But the wall didn't fall until '89. I was 2 years old before the
the Soviet Union technically persisted into 1990.
Yeah. Like, the Soviet Union is not that far gone.
Right, which is what I'm saying, though. That's this guy would go to people and talk to them, and it seemed like he had more luck talking to individuals
Of course.
than talking to groups of people.
Of course. Well, I had an interesting conversation. Nothing came of it, but I had an interesting conversation with a younger girl who was fresh into college. I think she was like 18 or 19 years old.
Yeah.
And this was right after the election, and we were discussing, I was actually in an airport. We were talking about Donald Trump, and she was giving me the common...
He's a racist. He's a sexist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The common answers.
Those are the buzzwords.
The buzzwords, yeah. And I asked her, and I said, okay, that's fine. I ended up not being able to really carry much of a dialogue on because she was one of the more of the keep the peace kind of types, like shush, 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 I don't want to talk about this kind of type.
She'd rather just not talk than get into conflict.
Right, exactly, one of those types. But we were talking about it. I said, okay, let's say he is. Let's say that he is. Let's say everything that you're saying is true. Mm-hmm. How much could he really get done in those, one of the biggest lobbying groups in Congress right now is NOW, the National Organization for Women.
Yeah.
You think they're not going to fight him every step of the way if he tried to do some funky shit?
Right.
It's not going to happen. I said,
right.
But so instead of looking at stuff like who he is, and I'm also very Machiavellian, I don't care, Donald Trump could literally be the worst human being on the planet of Earth, and I don't care.
Literally Hitler.
Yeah, right. And I wouldn't care if he follows the idea of the end justifies the means. I'm a very end justifies the means kind of person. When it comes to statecraft, interpersonal relationships are a little bit different. Statecraft is a totally different animal.
Yeah.
When you're talking about statecraft, you know what? Sometimes you got to do dirty shit to get what you need done.
Well, they've long said that if we treated countries the way we treated people, they'd all be in asylums.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's the kind of arguments that you should be having, simply because statistics don't usually work.
Well, I think there's one problem with the appeal to emotion, like Chadis was saying, when they bring up, but what about the Syrian women? If you respond, yeah, but what about our women? A lot of these people have been indoctrinated through these leftist education, quote-unquote, educational institutions.
Free education.
To their philosophy dictates that our women must stop existing as a concept. One, because women aren't property. The white man doesn't own women. But also because they want to dilute all of the races to sameness, because if we are all the same, we can all fall under the same umbrella.
Which is actually a very boring, because...
And that's true, but beside the point.
Yeah, I know.
It's like I was talking about with ethno-states.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, what they want is to form a government that can govern all people by making the world into one giant unified ethno-state.
Right, they want a Star Trek type.
Yeah, so when we
philosophy.
respond with, but what about our women,
Mm-hmm.
they deny the existence of our women.
And that's actually something I've noticed. Like, okay, to the leftist mind, blacks are a discrete racial unit. Asians are a discrete racial unit. The various native tribes are a discrete racial unit. But white people are a social construct. And that fucking boggles the mind. Because we can trace the ancestry of Western Europe, of Europe.
Back 44,000 years.
Yeah, all the way back to the Caucasus. We know where white people as a whole came from. And ironically enough, to these people, like, oh, well, Indians are people of color. They're related to us. They come from the same place. We share similar languages.
Yeah, but
They're
there's
Indo-European.
there's a little thing called natural selection that picks your genetics according to your environment.
And that's another thing that really amuses me about the left.
Yeah.
Evolution applies to dogs, it applies to cats, it applies to frogs, birds, insects, microorganisms, but not to human beings.
Yeah.
You can't. Humans do not have characteristics that our environments have selected in us.
It's almost as if black people have a harder time making vitamin D in colder climates than white people sunburn
almost,
in Africa.
It's almost like they're like, what is it that the left calls us all the time? What, science deniers?
Yeah. Well, the idea there is, so while these points are true and good, I actually, I started in the middle of an argument simply to get to my point faster. Yeah. You wouldn't start there. Like with the appeal to emotion, you would not start there. You would start with, if you had the time and the listening person to do it, you would start with
facts and figures and build two.
Well, you would start by saying, okay, let's use Asian culture.
Yeah.
Like, man, Asian culture is so cool. Don't you think it's cool? Yeah, I think it's cool too. Man, it's so cool. Blah, blah, blah. And then you start talking about different cultures. You're like, man, it sure would suck if we were all like just one homogenous blob because we'd lose all our culture.
Yeah.
And then you fall into that, and they're like, well, white people don't have culture, which is bullshit.
Yeah. Fucking really?
But that's the argument.
Yeah,
that's where that conversation begins. Because then you start saying, it's like, look, no, like I don't hate these groups of people. I enjoy their culture very much.
And I want to preserve their culture.
And I want to preserve it, yeah.
So we can all enjoy it. Well, it's funny. They kind of throw whites together under one umbrella.
Well, the idea, it's kind of funny, but the idea is like every race is in a museum to the others.
Yeah.
In a museum unto themselves. For instance, like Asian culture, it's one of those, look but don't touch kind of things. Like, I'm not talking about appropriation. I'm talking about don't meddle.
Yeah.
Like, if you're willing, like, if you like wearing, like, these clothes and stuff, yeah, do it. Like, that's interesting.
But everybody can use European stuff.
Well, right, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah,
this is the conversation to have.
It's cultural appropriation if I wear the kimono that I bought from a man who came back from Japan.
Yeah.
But when a Japanese person wears Frankish pants and an English-style shirt, that's okay.
Yeah.
But
there's no such thing as white culture. We don't have an ethnic dress. We didn't invent flannel or denim.
Right. Well, the idea there is, that's the conversation to have.
Yeah.
Without getting bitter about it.
Yeah.
Run this by
Without getting bitter about it.
run this by you because it's because I know one of the things, and I think Cobra and Chadis will kind of maybe agree with us a little bit more, but because because Christianity has is intertwined in the fabric of Western culture, and because the left hates and absolutely despises Christianity in general, it's patriarchy, it's this, it's that, or it's pro-race and whatever they want to pull out of the hat. Is it kind of, in a way, it's destroying our culture, or kind of a way to stick it to the man? Or
here's, I will take this gauntlet up as the only non-Christian at the table.
Okay.
I don't think it's religion.
Okay.
It's not really even morality. It's masculinity.
Okay.
Because the hardest thing to control is a free-thinking man.
Okay.
Well, and
the absolute hardest thing to control is a masculine man who leads. Because the problem is, if you get a man who is a leader, people will naturally follow him according to that herd mentality. And when you get a man who is a leader and people will follow him, that gets dangerous. That's how things happen.
Right.
And there is nothing more. There is nothing more.
That's how the Colosseums get built.
That's how Colosseums get built. It's also how Colosseums get toppled.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that they run into. So if you get rid of the very, very masculine man who wishes to lead and wishes to make a difference, you have effectively destroyed your only competition.
Right.
well, in addition to that, I find that to be very true. It's a very good observation. In addition to that, they do have a vested interest in destroying a culturally Christian society.
Right.
Because Christianity is naturally hierarchical. There's the animals, and then there's the angels, and then there's us above them. Then there are our religious leaders, and then God.
Yeah, not only
It's
that.
It's hierarchical, it's patriarchal.
Yeah.
It's also opposed to a lot of the things they really
Right, that's what I
like.
was about to bring up.
Yeah,
like homosexuality, for case in point. Culturally, or politically, it's not up to me what you do in your bedroom.
Yeah.
But religiously, it should never have gotten to the point where it was normalized.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's...
Well, I mean, it's funny because if you say that, they'll go, "Oh, it's a slippery slope." Well, slippery slope's only a fallacy if it's not true.
Yeah.
I mean, look at where we're at now. You have online, you have magazines like Salon and whatnot, literally trying to normalize pedophilia now because they think they can get away with it because they've normalized everying else.
Right.
And not only that, and the reason I say it's not necessarily the religious aspect is because you see a lot of slamming going on towards the pagan groups, specifically heathen groups, specifically heathens, for the simple fact that
the closer I've noticed the closer I've noticed that heathen and pagan groups are to actual historical groups, the more flack they catch.
Because you're racist, and that's the exact same thing. It's the patriarchal. Oh, you're a racist. You're a blah blah blah.
Well,
and that's the issue.
Almost every religion is an ethnic religion, but in addition to that, almost every religion... No, actually, that I can think of, every religion is hierarchical. Mm-hmm. And you notice every communist country that has existed has been atheistic and largely outlawed any form of religion that they could get away with.
Right, because
you can't build a classless society when all of the people are fervent believers in a philosophical system that glorifies class.
Also, the simple fact that belief in gods takes away the authority of the state to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Any belief that one has, because right now, if the state told you that you can't pray anymore to your God, what are you going to do?
I'm going to do it anyway.
Well, there you go. Because any type of religious construct destroys some of the state's power just by existing. That's the issue with a lot of communists, because that requires the state to have complete control.
I think Coffee Pod said it before that an armed populace is the biggest threat to state power. I would say that a religious populace is the biggest threat to state power.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
because it is physically possible to confiscate all the guns. You can't confiscate religion.
Well, look at what's happening. Look what's happening in the Middle East right now.
Yeah.
Say what you will about ISIS, those fuckers really believe what they say.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And honestly, if they kept their shit in their own backyard, I wouldn't mind them so bad.
Well, there you go. But the anyway, so I'm going to try to reel this back in a little bit of what we were
back to the
supposed to be talking about. Colleges.
Yeah.
And the idea of what's happening in colleges. There's a couple of issues, or a couple of thoughts that I had, and I've held these thoughts for a while that I wanted to air and just get some feedback on and talk about it. One, and the most important being that I don't think that everybody should go to college. And I'm a little bit, I'm gonna take the snobby route on this a little bit. There are some people that don't deserve college. There are some people that have no need to be in college. I am a firm believer that the SATs should be more strict, should be stricter, and should also be a form of, instead of saying which college you get into, it should be a form of whether you get into college at all.
Fun fact, they've actually had to dumb down the SAT testing.
Which is what I'm getting at, because there are some individuals, it should be based entirely on IQ, because when you let anybody and everybody in, that you give people a false sense of importance, and they feel like their dumbass opinion matters.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. Perfect example of this. So, as much flack as we talk about philosophy majors, I fucking love philosophy.
Yeah.
It's one of my babies. When I was going to community college for a while, I was taking every philosophy class I could get a hold of as my electives, because I'm not dumb enough to actually major in philosophy. But I do love it. I enjoy it very much. And I ran into this issue when I was in these classes. When I was doing a lot of the online work, like the stuff on the forums and stuff, where you have to post like something every week, you know.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah. We start talking to these groups, and a philosophical idea would be presented. Mm-hmm. And they would say, "What do you think about this?" Or say something about this. And I was flabbergasted by some of the responses I was getting. The dumbest shit that wasn't even philosophical in nature. It was simply like, I felt like my education was suffering because I wasn't being challenged at all in this philosophical class, because I was grasping the ideas just fine. However, I would argue
you couldn't have a discussion.
Not only that, to the point where I would argue ideas, and I would finish it up and I'd post it, and I'm like, I don't feel like I argued that very well.
Yeah.
But I had to post that week, so I was sitting there, I was like, I didn't feel like I argued that very well. But the professors were so happy that I just knew what the fuck was going on, I would get A's on it.
Yeah.
I wrote an entire fucking paper for my final on, there's a concept in philosophy called, does the center hold?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this?
Vaguely.
Okay. Am I the only one here that knows?
Go ahead and give a mini lecture.
Okay, so there's an idea in philosophy called does the center hold? And the center being is there a single thing that and this has been years since I've actually looked into this, and I didn't expect this to pop up, so I didn't look into it before the podcast. So pulling from memory, I'm going to try to say this as clearly as I can. If I get it wrong, I'll look it up and I'll amend it next week. The idea of the center holding, for what I remember, is there has to be a thing, a single thing, anything that you can grab onto in philosophical nature, that you can look at it objectively and say, this is true. This is objectively true from every possibility. Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like Descartes' I think, therefore I am. That is his holding center for his
exactly, and that's the idea. There is you have to find something that is objectively true. That is difficult,
or at the very least that somebody else can't effectively argue against.
Right, but see, that's a problem in philosophy, because when you really break philosophy down, there's not a lot there. Okay, there's not a lot, because you can't always trust your sense. You can't philosophically prove that your senses are reliable. You can't philosophically prove really much of anything.
Yeah.
I wrote an entire paper that basically dismantled philosophy as a fucking process. Like, I wrote a paper titled "The Center Doesn't Have to Hold." The idea that you don't have to have a defining thing that says this is objectively true to move forward.
Yeah.
That never should have made it. That should not have been fucking acceptable. I mean, really and truly. And I wrote this, was in one of my first philosophy classes, and I learned a lot since then, so I realized how silly that idea was later.
Yeah.
But I still got a 98 on it, simply because I understood the principle.
Yeah.
That is horseshit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. When I say there are certain individuals that should not be allowed in college, that's why. Because it dumbs down. There was a time, the whole reason we walk across stages in robes and stuff, it's not because we really like our dangly bits. It's because that was what scholars wore back in the day. Like, that was what let people know, hey, this guy's pretty fucking smart.
Yeah.
He studies for a living. This is what he does. And these people were historically the people that talked to kings. They were the advisors. They were the types that would sit there, and if you had a question, you would go to the dude in fucking robes.
Yeah.
Well, and it's and another thing is, this actually ties back into like the origin of the name master's degree, for instance.
Right.
It used to be that was the only degree you could get. In the Middle Ages, you couldn't graduate from a university unless you were a master. And you had studied philosophy, you had studied theology, you had studied what at the time was called physical philosophy, we now call it physics.
Right.
You had studied things like alchemy, you knew multiple languages. You had to be educated in general and be proficient in a wide number of subjects to be considered educated at all.
And because of this system...
And now you can, specialize in queer feminist basket weaving and get a fucking master's degree.
Right, and the issue that you run into...
else.
Yeah, and that's the issue you run into. So now when you let everybody in, it waters it down. People that should not be there are there.
Yeah.
They should not be there. I had a conversation with a woman, I shit you not. We were sitting there and in a class, a higher math class, and this woman was discussing how she had gotten into a fight with her baby daddy and threw a moped and hit him in the face.
What?
Right. And that's not saying that to be a, the point I'm getting at is these kind of people should never be allowed in college because their minds are simply not big enough to grasp the concepts there.
Yeah.
And when you dumb down the waters, it stops. And I'm not claiming to be the smartest person in the world, and I'm not claiming that I'm one of the elites. I'm saying that there are certain people that should be in college and certain people that should not.
Yeah, well, not only that, but you go ahead, brother.
Thank you. Well, this goes to the liberalization of colleges. Mm-hmm. College, under a liberal system where Marxism and going back farther, the Enlightenment ideal of...
Let's be more accurate. Let's say progressive, because liberalism is closer to libertarianism. True liberalism is essentially libertarian.
Progressivism and going farther back to the Enlightenment ideal of all men being created equal. And in a post-Enlightenment educational facility, you must glorify mediocrity, or else you cannot be classless. The difference in people's ability naturally forms social class, and if you hold to the belief that all men are created equal, you thus must glorify mediocrity.
Not only that, I think it's also a situation of, you grew up and we grew up thinking, if I ever want to make anything of myself in life, I have to go to college, I have to go, essentially, when I was growing up, I was given the option because I was very lazy in high school, and as such, I was really falling behind. So, my mother, who had homeschooled me, came to me and said, "Look, would you like a trade degree? It's not quite as involved. And it's more, it's more of a vocational thing." And I remember Dad thinking, like, "No, you don't want a trade degree because you'll never get anywhere in life." Is it partly? I think it's partly what Cobra said, but it also partly, I think, has to do with what with the society telling us you're not allowed to be a tradesman because you're a dumbass if you're a tradesman. You're not allowed to be a plumber or a welder or a carpenter.
And we are back from our break. Sorry about that, guys.
All right. Anyway, what I was talking about was, you get in this mindset that you're not going to succeed unless you go to a higher education. That trade school, essentially, trade school becomes a dirty word. When, in fact, you can go to trade school and make just as much or more. Like, I can go to trade school right now, become a welder or a plumber, make more money than the guy who's, went to gender studies. That guy with gender studies will be working at McDonald's for the rest of his life.
Or teaching gender studies.
If he's lucky, because there's so many people that graduate with that degree.
Or similar degrees.
And those are the people that swamp these these jobs going for professors. And
there's something like 70% of college professors now have a left-leaning bias.
Right.
Well, not only that, a lot of the reason, and this ties back into what I was saying, is a lot of these students that really shouldn't be there because their minds are not bright enough to be able to understand a lot of these concepts. What they'll do is they'll always take the easiest road out.
Is it that, or are they geared differently? Because you think, how many artists are there? Why do we have so many art classes and so many artists?
Because they're easy.
Well, is it that, or are they geared to building, to creating things? Should they instead go to a trade school instead of going to art class? Cover it.
Well, I think a large part of why we are so focused on go to college, don't go to trade school, go to college, is because the left has held such sway for so long, especially the vast majority of grade and high school teachers are left-leaning. part of what it is even we on the right have been indoctrinated by the left.
Yeah.
They want us all to go to college so that they can indoctrinate us. They're trying to push us into the mill.
Well, no.
And those who go to trade school don't get that indoctrination.
Right.
So they're socially outcast.
Right.
Well, and that you run into that, and you have these students that are extraordinarily dumb. Frankly, they go to these
Who are
classes
easily indoctrinated.
indoctrinated,
Yeah.
and the problem is self-sustaining because then they get these jobs in these colleges. The issue is I don't want
in an echo chamber.
they do, and the issue is I don't want a college that's right wing. I don't want a college that's going to push. The whole point of it is I want a college where
It's facts-based.
facts-based, but also I want professors with different leanings. I want the Marxist, and I want the fascist, and I want to hear what they both have to say.
Yeah.
And I want the freedom and the ability to decide for myself which one it is. I don't want to get a fucking 0 on a paper because the professor didn't like my point of view.
Yeah. Intellectual diversity.
Right.
That's
the whole point of college. That was why everybody said back in the day, and it was true back in the day, people said, well, college is hard. It wasn't necessarily difficult because of the course load, although the course load can be difficult.
Right.
It was difficult because a lot of stuff that you had just held to be true and had never thought about was brought into question.
Yeah.
Like the idea of the belief you've held your entire life.
It was challenged.
It was challenged for the first time, and you had
to be able to defend it.
you had to be able to defend it or accept the alternative. And accepting an alternative to a core value that you hold is hard to do.
Yeah.
Which is why college was hard. But now it's such a feel-good, safe space echo chamber that that's not happening anymore.
Well, I think that's
Well,
largely
you can't indoctrinate people by teaching them to challenge their own beliefs.
right. Well, and I think that's largely why your conservative students tend to come out with, actually tend to come out smarter. I think in many cases because they're being challenged and they're constantly having to defend their point of view. That's every discussion they have. And it ends up, and it's kind of sad because it almost always degrades into my feelings. Or you can't have you can't sit down at the lunch table and say, hey, what about this political ideology? You can't do that because suddenly, oh, you're a racist or you're a Nazi or like.
And you know what? Who cares?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you know what? Let's go ahead and push this because this is part of it. Who cares if you're a racist?
Yeah.
And when I'm saying that in a college setting, if you came down and said the KKK is right, they had everything right. What the immediate answer to that should be, why?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you are capable of defending your beliefs, every belief should hold so long as you can defend it.
And that's the thing, and that's why I'm not worried about stuff like the KKK beliefs, because that doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Right.
Yeah.
They're frankly very dumb ideas.
They are.
I hate to bring him up because he's kind of a degenerate pillow biter, but Milo Yiannopoulos actually brought up.
Hey, he's Catholic. He's your brother.
He's an apostate, is what he is. He's got a place, but that's beside the point.
Right.
He actually during one of his speaking events brought up the British National Party, or a very hardline British nationalist political
I
party.
remember that.
They're essentially dead now because at the time Britain's laws on speech were a lot looser, and you could talk about basically whatever you wanted, and the head of the BNP was actually interviewed on the BBC. And people didn't like what he had to say. People heard his ideas and went, no, we do not agree with this, and challenged those ideas. Yeah. And it killed the party.
Yeah.
If you restrict the ideas that can be expressed, then ideas that are either bad or ideas that are
weak,
unpopular, rather than being challenged and defeated, kind of they
Fester.
foment and they build in places where you can't see them.
Well, not only, you look at stuff today, like things that wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. Things like, my 67,000 genders and the culture.
Science denier.
Well, the thing is, you're getting this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
This stuff, objectively, it doesn't stand up to academic scrutiny.
Yeah.
It simply doesn't.
Yeah.
No.
You might not like that, or it might hurt your feelings, but it doesn't matter.
Well, shoot,
At
we're
the
getting
end of the day, fuck your feelings.
Yeah. Well, we're getting into area to where the common layman has enough sense to look at this ideology and say that's stupid.
Well, and it's interesting because a lot of the crazy shit the left is putting forward nowadays, the average person knows it's bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The average person, I'd be willing to say 70% of people hear that kind of thing and go, no, that's stupid.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Well, it's
Well, and
because
that's
they're being
why-
pandered to in the media.
But it's the media that has the voice.
Right.
Well, and yeah, I mean,
And the colleges that invent these ideas.
Well, unfortunately, we're almost at their mercy because you look at. I was thinking about this today. Look at the platforms we're using. We're using YouTube. We're using Facebook. We're using Twitter. All these different platforms are very left based. What happens one day if they just decide arbitrarily, "Fuck you," or you can't put anything up
Well,
here?
and a good example of this is there's a Facebook page, Earl of Grey, that I follow. Really good content. He got a 30-day ban for suggesting that perhaps there should be legal restrictions on pornography. 30-day ban.
Yeah.
He's had his page shut down 7 or 8 times within just the last year, just since I've been following him.
Yeah.
You know, there's a reason for that.
And his opinions are actually fairly mild, all things considering.
Yeah. Well, that's opening up, and this could be an entire video on itself. But pornography in itself is a man killer. I mean, that's it saps your virility. It tends to make you a little more, I guess, open-minded, for lack of a better term, to really stupid things.
Yeah.
But anyway,
but that's I think that's a video for another time.
Yeah, that could be its own.
We will eventually touch on that, I think. But
yeah,
Touch on it.
yeah.
You're
Okay.
both fired. Get out of here.
So you say.
So unfortunately, the only salvation I see for the college system as it stands now is a complete restructuring from the ground up.
Yeah.
That's not
Well, and something else.
I
I actually had some ideas on college, especially college attendance right now. But something I've noticed in the last few years, when for instance we were all going through high school, the big thing was get an associate's degree. Go to college for 2 years. It's easy. You can get all kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
You can't get any kind of job with an associate's degree anymore.
No.
Now it's you need a bachelor's. You need a bachelor's in sales to work at the Verizon store.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. You look at job postings on, for instance, monster.com, and it's like, oh, it's, sales with commission, suggest 4 years experience, bachelor's degree.
So wait, you have to physically go into debt for the rest of your life in order to have a job. Screw that. I'm going
An
to trade school.
entry level job.
Yeah.
entry-level job. And I have this theory about what I call degree inflation. If you have, and it's simple supply and demand. If you start off with nobody's got associate's degrees, so you need people who know what they're doing. So you push associate's degrees, and everybody needs one to get good jobs. Well, now you have 1 million associate's degrees. Everybody's fucking got one.
And they're not valuable anymore.
They're not valuable. So now, if you really want people who know what they're doing, you need to move up. You now need people with bachelors.
Well, the idea there was, I think, it was a flawed idea, but the idea was, we need to educate the people so the people can be more educated.
And I
But
think that was
the problem
idea.
is there are people that have no business being more educated.
Yeah. Well, and there's another idea I had. You notice, for instance, and it's actually I was reading a paper on this not too long ago, but there have been studies done on what kinds of schools have the best performing graduates. State-run schools across the world generally perform the poorest. Private schools perform slightly better. The best performing college graduates, it doesn't matter what country, typically religious schools that are run by religious orders.
Schools of theology.
Not necessarily schools of theology, but like if you go to a for instance, a Catholic college, even if it's not a seminary, even if it's just a kind of a liberal arts school,
You go to a Catholic college for an economics degree.
Yeah.
You get a better economics education
as a
than
general
in a state
rule,
school.
you will be a better economist than somebody who went to, say, a private or state-run school at the same level of prestige.
Right. Not only this, but and this gets into and this is scaling it back down to like a middle school and high school. And I am anti public education, and this is a discussion because I think public education is inherently a Marxist idea. Now, I don't believe that public schools will go away tomorrow. So instead, I'm willing to say, let's back this off. Let's say homeschool your kids, because the state has a zany idea that it somehow owns America's children.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, the state doesn't own your kids. You own your kids, and you are responsible for educating your child, not the government. And that's...
I would say that public schools are not necessarily a bad thing, because I think everybody should have a basic level of education.
My issue with
you should at the
homeschooling-
very least be able to read, write, add.
Right.
Oh yeah,
My
there should,
issue
I
with-
believe in like an SAT system or like a testing system or something, but
then you still get into the problem of state regulation of your homeschooling.
Right.
I think a better, happier medium for this would be, because you don't want. Unfortunately, some parents, again, some
Very
people should go
lazy.
to college. Some parents have no business teaching.
Yeah.
So
some
I think
parents
a
are
better
incredibly lazy.
solution to that would be having.
I think we should have higher standards for homeschooling.
Right.
I would also like to see, for instance, the Republicans, as much as they annoy me, have a very, very often put up the idea of school vouchers.
Uh-huh.
If you don't want to send your kids to public school, you can get a voucher to send them to a private school instead, and I would love to see something like that.
Well, and digressing a little bit further back to the correlation between who owns a college and the performance of their students.
Mm-hmm.
Religious colleges, it only makes sense their graduates would perform better because a public or a state-run school, as I was saying earlier, has a vested interest in glorifying mediocrity, whereas a religious college has a vested interest in making sure that their people are the best to lend credence and legitimacy to their ideals.
Right, well, because they push their...
Because religions are inherently hierarchical.
Right, so they push their
Whereas-
students farther.
Yeah, whereas America is a post-Enlightenment... We were founded on Enlightenment ideals,
Yeah.
and as I was saying earlier, if you hold to Enlightenment ideals, you are obligated to accept mediocrity.
Now, run this by you. Is it so much that... Is it not... Could it be that we're misinterpreting the idea of all men are created equal? Could it not be that all men are created equal in value, but there are some people who are smarter than others? Because here's the thing. Everybody's given a deck of cards when they're born. You can't really change these cards. You can add to them, but ultimately your base set is your base set. So
some people get Delta Royal Flush,
Right.
others have a dead man's hand.
Right. Now, my question here being, is it so much intellectually, are we misinterpreting it saying intellectually people are equal, or should it be interpreted as in value people are equal, but they have different strengths?
See, I think this may be a discussion for another time, but I have a very strong philosophical problems with all of the Enlightenment ideals, and very brief rundown here is the fact that the Enlightenment scholars were the same people who pushed the French Revolution. And immediately following the overthrow of the French crown, the Enlightenment scholars, who we've based our system on, immediately began implementing what would later become known as socialist policy. They also attacked the church vehemently because they tried to set up what they called the cult of reason.
Right.
Which they... In setting up the cult of reason, they guillotined a load of priests because religion is hierarchical.
Well,
Enlightenment ideals are proto-Marxist.
Right. Well, and it gets in the way of your stupid ideology if you have a monarch that was set down by God himself. So,
well, and I think the core of it is, and I think we can all agree to this on a certain degree, all human lives at their base level, when a human being is born, all humans as they are born,
they
have
deserve
equal moral value.
They deserve equal dignity, but they do not necessarily deserve or necessitate equal standing within society. Unfortunately, Enlightenment ideals absolutely reject the reality of the differing abilities of humans.
Well, and
It's like, in America, every person over the age of 18 can vote.
Yeah.
Why?
Not every person over the age of 18 is intelligent enough.
Yeah,
it should be.
educated.
I believe
Why
it should
should
probably
it-
be bumped up to 21. But
I think there
no,
should be
it's
a
not.
test.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
even that. Why is an illiterate person who didn't graduate high school, why is their vote equal to jackrabbits
yeah.
who went to college?
Well,
And I agree
that's a bit of a slippery slope there, because if you,
I don't think so.
well, it depends on the ruling regime, because if you get the wrong regime in power, they can start to say, okay, well, these group of people are not legitimate.
There's a very simple fix to this though.
Mm-hmm.
Landowners. Only landowners should have the ability to vote, and the reason being is because they're the only ones with real skin in the game.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, let's look at us. Like, every one of us rent.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah,
correct?
we,
Okay.
we-
Yeah.
we would all technically be disqualified from voting.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that because at the end of the day, all of my shit is mobile.
Yeah.
And if it really got to the point where I just can't take it anymore and I can't
Just
stand
leave.
it, I can leave. Like,
Go
that
ahead.
is an option I have.
We can all go to Texas.
Or
Only landowners are anchored here.
they have a
Yeah.
vested interest in what happens.
Right.
Therefore, also, not many landowners that I've met are dumb, especially in today's age where you need
it's
a good bit of
very
money.
difficult to own land.
Yeah.
Well,
You
Well,
have
you
to
have to
you
manage
have
it.
to be good at managing your own life. You have to not be mediocre to be a landowner.
I would say
But we push mediocrity.
landowners, veterans. I think if you have gone out of your way to volunteer to potentially die for this place, you should have the right to make decisions concering this place.
Yeah, I can get
but
behind that.
I've met a lot of vets that
They're
are
all-
not the most.
I will say
intelligent.
there are a lot of really dumb vets.
Yes.
I think Jack Rabbit can also attest to this.
Yeah.
Like you have both met some really dumb people.
like the entire Marine Corps.
Yeah, no, Marines. Sorry, you guys can't vote anymore. Now we will compensate you with all you can eat crayons.
I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry.
I'm not. I'm just kidding.
My dad was a Marine. I can't say too much.
It's kind of awkward being the only civilian in an entire group.
It's okay. Hey, you're still young.
Yeah, but see, I don't want to go fight for oil barons. So
That's true. No,
So the issue.
You almost sound like you have a problem with roads. You do know that roads are made out of oil, right?
Oh my goodness.
well, what are roads?
we're going. We don't need them.
So
Yeah.
that's an interesting topic. Unless anybody has any other ideas, let's discuss the Enlightenment next week. I need to read up on it. It's not one of my strong suits, but I'm interested, and I will read, and we can discuss it.
Okay.
Unless somebody has any other ideas.
I think Chadis did, but one of these days I do want to discuss the Enlightenment because post-Enlightenment education has told us an awful lot of lies about the church.
Well, ideally, we can probably tackle at least two subjects in a single podcast. If we're talking for an hour, like look at this one, the college one, we basically did for half of the podcast. So
And we didn't even get a tenth of the way in. We can't even cover one subject in one podcast.
I think here soon we should schedule maybe like a month or two, or
Yeah.
like a month where we do like 4 like religion podcasts or something, just to
Yeah.
get it out of the way.
Yeah.
Get that out.
Yeah, I can feel that. Yeah.
But that's we can talk about that off mic. I think.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, guys, and unless anybody else has anything else to say, I think we'll call that a podcast.
Yeah. I do have more to say on colleges, but we're running short on time and college needs to be discussed further.
Yeah. Definitely. We could
Drink milk and eat red meat.
filter your water.
Systems
Take brain force.
systems of control. Destroy Moodle.
Buy local, guys. This has been RightCast Radio. I am your host. They call me the Jackrabbit. With me, as always, is the founder of rightchan.org
Chadis.
and our two fantastic, just wonderful co-hosts.
You call me fantastic, but as a renter, I'm pretty sure I'm mediocre. Cobra.
And your sweet southern hospitality coffee pot.
Guys, we'll see you next week. We hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one.
Kill a commie for mommy.